Stop being so dramatic. It's just a little blood. Get an Uber. I have a client dinner." Those were the exact words my husband said to me while I was curled on the bathroom floor of the ER, actively losing our baby. I was 28 years old. I was wearing a thin, paper hospital gown that was entirely open in the back, the rough synthetic material tearing slightly at the shoulder where I had gripped it too tightly. My bare knees were pressed against cold, sterile linoleum that smelled aggressively of industrial bleach, rubbing alcohol, and the sharp, coppery tang of my own blood. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed with a sickly, relentless electrical buzz, casting long, pale shadows across the room. I was shaking so violently my teeth were clicking together, a rapid-fire staccato sound that echoed off the white-tiled walls. He didn't bend down. He didn't touch my trembling shoulder. He didn't offer his coat to cover my exposed, shivering back. He just checked his heavy silver Rolex, adjusted the knot of his navy blue Italian silk tie, and walked out the swinging wooden doors. The doors flapped back and forth on their hinges, the rhythmic thud, 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 thud sounding like a fading heartbeat. 7 hours later, I took a solitary cab back to a dark, empty house. The vinyl seat of the taxi was freezing, and the driver kept glancing at my tear-streaked face in the rearview mirror, bathed in the passing orange glow of the streetlights. But my husband had absolutely no idea what was coming. He thought he had left a broken, hysterical woman in that hospital ward. He thought my spirit had been entirely shattered on that linoleum floor. He thought I was weak. The DNA test I took 3 weeks later was just supposed to be for a genetic health screening. A desperate, scrambling attempt to figure out why my body kept failing me, why my womb felt like a hostile environment. But what that small plastic vial of saliva actually revealed, and the ruthless medical subpoena that followed it, didn't just end our marriage. It completely annihilated his entire existence. To understand how I stood in front of his entire family a year later, wearing emerald silk and watched his life burn to ash with absolute serenity, you need to know who I am. My name is Kaylin. I live in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where the winters are brutal enough to snap thick oak tree branches like dry twigs, and the people are culturally trained from birth to keep their suffering strictly to themselves. I was a wedding planner. That was my entire professional life. My day-to-day existence consisted of making sure other people's happiest days didn't fall apart when the caterer got drunk in the loading bay or the florist delivered the wrong shade of white roses. I was paid exorbitant amounts of money to manage disasters with a calm, plastered-on smile. I knew how to stand in the middle of a burning room, feel the heat blistering my skin, and politely pretend it was just a little warm. But long before I ever organized a seating chart or smoothed a panicked bride's veil, I was raised by my grandmother Elise. My parents were ghosts. My father walked out when I was 4, packing a single duffel bag while I watched cartoons on the living room floor. My mother spent the next 15 years chasing him through various abusive, alcohol-soaked substitutes. Grandmother Elise finally took me in when I was 10. She lived in a drafty, wood-paneled house in South Minneapolis where the radiators hissed and clanked all night. She was a woman carved out of granite, with iron gray hair pinned tightly to her scalp and hands calloused from decades of gardening. She didn't believe in crying over things you couldn't control. I clearly remember sitting at her heavy oak kitchen table when I was 12. The wood was deeply grooved, smelling of lemon oil and old paper. I was sobbing so hard I was hiccuping because a girl at school had stolen my favorite denim jacket and lied to the teacher about it, claiming she had bought it at the mall. My grandmother didn't coddle me. She didn't wrap her arms around me. She walked to the stove, poured hot water into a porcelain mug, set a cup of bitter black tea in front of me, and sat down in the chair opposite mine. "Why are you wasting your salt, Kaylin?" she asked, her voice like dry autumn leaves scraping across a sidewalk. "Because she stole it," I wailed, wiping my nose on my sleeve, "and Mr. Henderson believed her." "Did you see her take it?" "Yes. I watched her pull it out of my locker." "Then why are you crying?" she asked, her pale blue eyes locking onto mine, entirely devoid of pity. "Because it isn't fair." Grandmother Elise took a slow sip of her tea. "Tears are just water, Kaylin. They wash away the dirt, but they don't fix the broken window. My grandmother always said, "Never let the person holding the knife tell you how deep the cut is." You don't cry when someone hurts you. You don't beg them to acknowledge your pain. You wait, you watch, you collect your proof, and then you make sure they never have the power to hold a knife again. I didn't fully understand the weight of those words then. I just stared into the dark, swirling surface of my tea. But that philosophy seeped into my bones. It became the absolute bedrock of my personality. Over the years, I became a quiet, relentless observer. I developed an obsessive, almost photographic memory for details. I catalog things in my mind. I notice when a coffee cup is moved 2 inches to the left on a desk. I remember the exact phrasing of a sentence spoken 3 weeks ago. I register the micro-expressions on people's faces when they think no one is looking. I don't forget that one thing about me. That quiet, invisible, terrifying patience. It's the only reason I'm sitting here today in peace, wrapped in a warm blanket, instead of locked in a sterile psychiatric ward, which is exactly where my husband meticulously tried to put me. I met Declan when I was 24. It was a Tuesday in early November. The kind of Minneapolis afternoon where the sky is the color of bruised iron, the air smells like impending snow, and the wind physically hurts your face, stinging your cheeks like tiny glass shards. I was at a small artisanal bakery in the North Loop trying to buy a box of raspberry danishes for a difficult client meeting. My bare hands were freezing, stiff, and clumsy. I fumbled my leather wallet at the register, and 3 $10 bills slipped from my numb fingers, blowing across the flour-dusted hardwood floor toward the door. A man stepped firmly on the bills with a polished leather boot to stop them from blowing out into the street. He stooped down, picked them up, handed them to me, and smiled. It was a slow, easy, devastatingly confident smile. "Rough wind out there," he said, his voice a deep, resonant baritone. "It's brutal," I laughed nervously, tucking the money away. "Thank you. I think my fingers have officially frozen solid." "Let me help you with those," he offered, nodding toward the stack of bakery boxes the cashier was sliding across the counter. "Oh, you don't have to do that." "I insist. I'm Declan, and I can't in good conscience let you drop these in a snowdrift." That was Declan. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with thick dark hair, perfectly styled, and this incredibly grounded, steady energy that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. He worked in high-stakes commercial real estate. He smelled like expensive sandalwood, crisp cold air, and peppermint. He bought my coffee, a dark roast, no sugar, crisp. We sat in the condensation-fogged window of that bakery for 2 straight hours, entirely ignoring our respective schedules. We watched the first snow of the season start to fall, dusting the brick streets in white, talking about everything and nothing. "He's so solid," I thought to myself as he told a self-deprecating story about his first real estate deal. "He's so anchored." I thought I had found my safe harbor. God, I was so impossibly stupid. The first 2 years were beautiful. And I mean that with absolute sincerity. It wasn't a clumsy illusion, or at least the illusion was executed so flawlessly that not even my grandmother would have spotted the seams. He would leave bright yellow sticky notes on my fogged-up bathroom mirror before he left for work in the early mornings. Just little, heart-swelling things. "You look beautiful today. Can't wait for dinner. You're the best thing that ever happened to me." We would cook homemade pasta at midnight in our small, warm kitchen, flour dusting our noses and our clothes. We would drink cheap, robust red wine that stained our lips, laughing until our ribs physically ached and the neighbors knocked on the wall. I look back at those golden, glowing memories now, and I feel a wave of physical nausea wash over me. Because I know now what he was doing on the days he was extra sweet. I know exactly what the sudden expensive bouquets of white lilies actually meant. They weren't tokens of love. They were guilt deposits. The warning signs started in year 3. Looking back, the red flags weren't just flags. They were a massive, deafening parade with marching bands and flashing neon lights. But when you love someone, when you have tied your entire concept of safety to them, you paint those red flags green and desperately convince yourself you're colorblind. The first subtle shift was his phone. For 2 years, his phone had lived face up on the kitchen counter, casually discarded. Suddenly, it was always face down. He would slide it into his pocket the second I walked into the room. He began taking it into the bathroom with him when he showered, setting it on the sink while the water ran. I asked him about it once while we were eating lukewarm Thai takeout on the living room couch. "Why do you take your phone into the shower now?" I asked casually, twirling a noodle on my fork, desperately trying to sound light and unbothered. He didn't look up from his screen. His thumbs kept rapidly tapping. "I listen to podcasts, Kaylin." "You never used to listen to podcasts in the shower. You always said the water drowned out the audio." He finally looked up, his jaw tightening just a fraction of an inch. "People change their habits, Kaylin. Is that a crime?" "No, it's just weird. You treat that thing like it's glued to your hand lately." He set the phone down with a sharp, deliberate click against the coffee table. "Why? Are you tracking my movements now? Looking for something to be mad about? That's a little paranoid, don't you think?" It was the way he said the word paranoid. A tiny, sharp little needle of a word, coated in poison, slid right under my ribs. I felt a flush of heat in my cheeks. Am I being paranoid? I wondered. He works hard. He's allowed to have privacy. I dropped it. I swallowed the unease and went back to my noodles, pretending it didn't taste like ash. The second sign was his scent. Occasionally, he would come home from late site visits in the dead of night, slipping off his coat in the dark hallway. But when he slid into bed next to me, he didn't smell like the dusty drywall or stale office air of commercial real estate. He smelled weirdly sterile, like harsh industrial soap, like iodine, like a hospital. "You smell like alcohol pads and bleach," I mentioned one evening as he stood in the closet, hanging up his suit jacket. He didn't even blink. His back remained to me. The new property we're touring was an old medical clinic in Edina. The cleaning crew went totally overboard today trying to prep it for the buyers. "But you're in real estate, Declan, not sanitation. Why does it smell like it's literally scrubbed into your skin? It smells like a hospital ward." He turned around, his eyes cold and flat. "Because I was trapped in a poorly ventilated room for 4 hours with industrial cleaners, Kaylin. Can you please stop interrogating me the second I walk through the door? I'm exhausted. I have a headache, and I don't need my wife acting like a homicide detective." I told myself it was nothing. I told myself I was being overly sensitive. It wasn't nothing. The third sign was the systematic gaslighting, small, seemingly insignificant things at first. I would ask him to pick up my dry cleaning on his way home from the office. When he walked in empty-handed, I would sigh. "You forgot the dry cleaning again?" I asked, standing in the kitchen. He looked me dead in the eye, his expression completely blank. "You never asked me to do that, Kaylin." "Yes, I did. I told you this morning while you were making coffee. I specifically said I needed the blue dress for a client tasting tomorrow." "No, you didn't." He poured himself a glass of water, taking a slow sip. "You probably thought about asking me, but you never actually said the words out loud." "Declan, I swear to God I told you. I even texted you about it at noon." He pulled out his phone, opened our message thread, and held the screen up to my face. There was no text. "See? Nothing. You probably drafted it and forgot to hit send. Your memory is getting really bad lately, Kaylin. Honestly, it's concerning. You're constantly mixing things up." He said it with such gentle, genuine concern, his brow furrowed with worry. That was his terrifying gift. He could wrap a cruel, calculated lie in the softest, warmest blanket of fake empathy. I checked my own phone later. The text wasn't there. I sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing my temples, genuinely wondering if my brain was misfiring. Am I losing it? But the real nightmare, the true plunging descent into a psychological hell, began when we started trying for a baby. I wanted a child more than I wanted air in my lungs. I wanted a busy, noisy, chaotic house to replace the quiet, lonely childhood I had endured. Declan enthusiastically agreed. We tried for 8 exhausting, emotionally draining months. When I finally sat on the edge of the bathtub and saw those 2 pink lines appear on that plastic stick, I cried so hard I couldn't pull air into my lungs. Declan picked me up and spun me around the bathroom. We painted the spare bedroom a soft, buttery yellow. We spent hours in bed picking out names, debating syllables and meanings. I was so profoundly happy I felt like I was glowing. I lost the baby at 11 weeks. It happened at 2 a.m. on a freezing Thursday night. The pain woke me up from a dead sleep. It wasn't a dull ache. It was a sharp, violent, tearing sensation deep in my lower abdomen, like someone had hooked a hot wire to my organs and pulled. I gasped, rolling out of bed. I stumbled to the master bathroom, my bare feet slapping against the cold tile. I turned on the glaring overhead light, pulled down my sleep shorts, and saw the bright red blood stark against the white porcelain. I screamed. It was a primal, terrifying sound. Declan! He appeared in the doorway a few seconds later, wearing his gray sweatpants, rubbing his eyes and yawning. "What time is it?" he mumbled, sounding profoundly inconvenienced. "I'm bleeding," I sobbed, clutching my stomach, sinking to my knees on the bath mat. "Declan, wake up. I'm losing it. I'm losing the baby." He looked at the blood on the floor. Then he looked at my tear-streaked, terrified face. His expression didn't change. There was no shock. There was no panic. There was absolutely no grief, just a heavy, exhausted annoyance. "Are you sure it's a miscarriage?" he asked, leaning against the door frame. "Maybe it's just spotting." "Look at the floor, Declan. Look at my hands. Please help me." He let out a long, slow sigh, running a hand through his hair like I had just asked him to run a tedious errand in rush-hour traffic. "Okay, fine. Let's just go to the ER. Grab a towel." He drove me to the hospital in agonizing silence. The heater in his luxury SUV was blasting, but I couldn't stop shivering. The radio was playing soft, muted jazz, Miles Davis. I was curled into a tight ball in the plush leather passenger seat, crying into a dark blue bath towel, terrified out of my mind, bleeding onto his upholstery. He didn't reach over to hold my hand. He didn't offer a word of comfort. He just stared straight ahead at the snowy road, tapping his fingers on the leather steering wheel to the upbeat tempo of the jazz music. Tap, tap, tap. When we finally got to the ER, the fluorescent lights blinded me. They put me in a small, curtained triage room. The ER nurse, a kind woman with tired eyes, confirmed the absolute worst. There was no heartbeat on the bedside monitor. The process of loss was already starting. I was given a thin paper gown and told to wait on the narrow, crinkling hospital bed for the on-call doctor to perform the final ultrasound and discuss my options. That was when Declan's phone violently buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out. He looked at the glowing screen, and his posture instantly changed. The sluggish annoyance vanished. He stood up straight, his shoulders squaring, his eyes widening with acute focus. "I have to go," he said briskly, slipping the phone back into his pocket. I looked up at him from the hospital bed, my vision blurred and swimming with hot tears. I felt a cold spike of confusion pierce through my grief. "What? What do you mean you have to go? I'm miscarrying our baby right now. I have an emergency meeting with a client." He began buttoning his wool coat. "Declan, it's 2:30 in the morning. What client?" "Foreign investors. Time zones, Kaylin. You know how it is. The biggest commercial deal of the quarter is falling apart. Millions of dollars are on the line. I can't stay here and just watch you bleed. There's literally nothing I can do anyway. The doctor has it handled." "Declan, please," I begged, my voice breaking into a pathetic, desperate whine. I reached out my trembling, pale hand toward his coat sleeve. "Please don't leave me here alone. I'm terrified. I need my husband." He stepped backward, deliberately moving out of reach of my grasping hand. He looked down at me, curled on that miserable bed. His eyes were a mixture of cold pity and sheer, unadulterated disgust. "Stop being so dramatic. It's just a little blood. Get an Uber. I have a client dinner." And he turned on his heel and walked out. I lay there for 4 agonizing hours, going through one of the most traumatic, bloody, and emotionally devastating physical experiences a woman can endure, entirely alone. The nurses held my hand while I cried. Complete strangers wiped the sweat from my forehead. My husband was gone. That was the exact night the man I loved died. I didn't know who walked back into our house the next morning smelling faintly of coffee and looking entirely unbothered. But it wasn't my husband. It was a monster wearing his face. Over the next 6 months, the cruelty escalated in ways that still make the hair on my arms stand up. It wasn't a sudden, violent explosion. It was a slow, methodical, creeping suffocation. He was systematically trying to destroy my grip on reality, dismantling my sanity piece by piece so I would never have the strength to leave him. Beat one was the blatant disrespect. 2 weeks after the miscarriage, his mother, Sylvia, came over for a surprise visit. Sylvia was a wealthy, bitter woman who treated her son like a golden deity, and me like an inconvenient, cheap accessory he had picked up at a discount store. She walked into our living room wearing a fur-lined coat, ran a manicured finger over the oak mantelpiece, examined the dust on her fingertip, and sighed loudly. "Kaylin, this house is a disaster," she announced, dropping her designer handbag on the sofa. "There is dust everywhere. The kitchen sink is full of dishes. What exactly do you do all day?" I was sitting in an armchair, wrapped in a blanket. I was still physically recovering. My hormone levels were violently crashing, plunging me into a deep, paralyzing depression. "I'm recovering, Sylvia," I said softly, my throat dry. "From what? A heavy period? Women have miscarriages every day, dear. You don't see them shutting down their entire lives." Before I could summon the energy to defend myself, Declan walked in from the kitchen, holding a mug of coffee. "Leave her alone, Mom," he said. But his tone wasn't defensive. His voice was dripping with thick, cruel sarcasm. "She's very busy resting. Apparently, losing a pregnancy that was only a few weeks along requires months of intense bed rest. I wouldn't know. I just work 60 hours a week to pay the mortgage while she stares at the wall." Sylvia chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. I sat in the chair, staring at the intricate pattern of the Persian rug, feeling my chest cave in, too exhausted and hollowed out to fight back. Beat two was the isolation and control. A month later, I woke up to find my car keys missing from the decorative brass hook by the front door. I had a crucial vendor meeting at 10 a.m. for a massive summer wedding. I tore the house apart, flipping couch cushions, dumping out my purse, my heart hammering with panic. Finally, I called Declan at the office. "Hey, did you see my keys?" I asked, breathless. "I can't find them anywhere." "I took them," he said calmly. I could hear the sound of him typing on his keyboard in the background. "What? Why would you do that?" "You've seemed really distracted lately, Kaylin. You're grieving. You're emotional. I don't think you're safe to drive a 2-ton vehicle. Declan, I'm perfectly fine to drive. I have a job. I have a meeting in 40 minutes. I already called your assistant, Jessica. I told her you were having a mental health day and she needed to handle your meeting today. You need to stay home and focus on getting your mind right." "You called my employee? Declan, you can't just take my car and meddle in my business. I'm not a prisoner." "I am your husband." His voice suddenly dropped an octave, turning cold, hard, and utterly unyielding. "I decide what is safe for you right now because clearly you can't. Take a hot bath. Read a book. Do not leave the house." He hung up. I was stranded in my own home, pacing the hardwood floors for 2 days before he brought the keys back. I desperately told myself he was just being overprotective. "He's worried about me," I rationalized. "He's just clumsy with his care." Beat 3 was the replacement. I was vacuuming the interior of his SUV one bright Saturday afternoon. He was inside the house drinking a beer and watching a college football game. As I pushed the narrow plastic nozzle between the leather passenger seat and the center console, something hard rattled violently up the suction tube. I turned off the vacuum, pulled the attachment off, and reached my fingers deep into the dark, dusty crevice. I pulled out a baby pacifier. It was light blue, with a little yellow duck painted on the front. It was pristine, brand new, no dust. My heart completely stopped in my chest. All the ambient noise of the neighborhood, the lawnmowers, the chirping birds, faded into a high-pitched ringing in my ears. I sat back on my heels in the concrete driveway, staring at this tiny, incredibly specific piece of plastic, feeling the entire world tilt violently on its axis. I marched into the house, holding it out in my trembling palm. "Declan, what is this?" He looked at the pacifier. Then he looked at my face. His expression didn't twitch. He didn't blink. His heart rate didn't elevate. He had the emotional range and guilt capacity of a parking meter. My sister's kid dropped it, he said casually, taking a slow sip of his beer, his eyes drifting back to the television screen. Your sister lives in Chicago, Declan. She hasn't been to this house in 5 months. He stood up from the couch, uncoiling his large frame, towering over me. The easy demeanor vanished. Are you calling me a liar, Kaylin? I'm saying the timeline doesn't make sense. This pacifier is brand new. It doesn't even have dust on it. Because it was wedged in the seat. Honestly, your paranoia is becoming a sickness. Maybe you bought it and forgot. You've been doing crazy, erratic things ever since the miscarriage. You're obsessed with babies. You probably bought it at Target, dropped it in my car, and now you're using it to attack me. Honestly, Kaylin, you're scaring me. He snatched the pacifier from my hand, walked into the kitchen, and threw it in the stainless steel trash can. I stood in the living room, completely paralyzed, deeply doubting my own sanity. Did I buy it? My mind raced through every Target run, every drugstore visit of the past month. I knew I didn't, but he sounded so incredibly sure. He looked at me with such genuine fear and pity. Beat 4 was the public humiliation. It was Thanksgiving week. We were at a large, opulent dinner party hosted by one of his senior commercial real estate partners. There were 12 people seated at a massive, heavy oak dining table. Slices of rare prime rib bled onto fine china, expensive Cabernet clinked in crystal glasses, and the room smelled of roasted garlic and expensive perfume. The host's wife, a bubbly, overly Botoxed woman named Claire, turned her attention to me from across the table. So, Kaylin, Claire chirped loudly, silencing the side conversations. Any plans for little ones soon? You two have been married for a while now. And Declan would make such a handsome, fun dad. The entire table went quiet. 12 pairs of eyes looked expectantly at us. I felt my throat tighten, my airway restricting. My hands began to shake under the table. We're just focusing on our careers right now, I stammered, looking down at my uneaten mashed potatoes. No rush? Oh, come on, Claire pressed, laughing. Careers will always be there. Babies are the real joy. Declan laughed. It was a loud, booming, intensely cruel laugh that echoed off the high ceiling. Well, Claire, it's not for lack of trying, Declan announced casually to the entire table of colleagues, bosses, and strangers. But Kaylin's body can't seem to figure it out. She keeps dropping the ball, literally. So we're just enjoying the peace and quiet and the wine while her biology tries to get its act together. Complete, dead, suffocating silence fell over the dining room. You could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Claire's face went chalk white. A junior partner across the table stared at his plate in horror. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't throw my wine in his face. I just sat there, feeling my soul detach from my physical body. I carefully lifted my linen napkin, folded it into a perfect square, placed it gently on the table, stood up, and walked out of the restaurant into the freezing November night. He didn't follow me. He didn't even turn his head. Beat 5 was the digital leash. I woke up one morning to find my phone battery completely drained, which was odd because I always charged it. When I finally powered it on, I noticed a new icon on my home screen. A little blue shield. An app called Family Safe Tracker. I found Declan making a protein shake in the kitchen. Why is there a GPS tracking app installed on my phone? I demanded, holding the screen up. The blender whirred to a stop. He poured the green liquid into a glass. I put it there last night. For your safety. I didn't authorize this. You went through my phone while I was sleeping? You've been wandering, Kaylin. You're forgetting things. You got lost coming home from the grocery store last week. I didn't get lost. There was a massive road closure on 35W and I had to take a detour. You were gone for 2 hours, he said, his voice dropping into that terrifyingly calm, clinical tone. You're unstable. You're highly emotional. I need to know where you are at all times so I know you're safe. What if you have a breakdown behind the wheel? Remove it right now, Declan. This is insane. He leaned across the marble counter, his eyes locking onto mine. If you have nothing to hide, Kaylin, it shouldn't matter. The only women who get angry about their husbands knowing where they are women who are sneaking around. Are you sneaking around? I stared at him, trapped in his labyrinth of twisted logic. I left the app on the phone. Beat 6 was the spatial violation. I had a small, intricately carved wooden memory box hidden in the very back of my closet, tucked beneath my winter sweaters. Inside was the single positive pregnancy test, the single grainy ultrasound photo we had gotten before the loss, and a tiny pair of yellow knit socks I had bought the day I found out I was pregnant. It was my private, sacred grief. One snowy afternoon, feeling particularly low, I went to open it, just to hold the tiny socks in my hands. The box was gone. I searched the closet. I searched my dresser drawers. I tore apart the bathroom cabinets, my breathing growing shallow and panicked. Nothing. When Declan got home from work, I was frantic, standing in the hallway with wild hair. "Declan, where is the wooden box from my closet? The one with the baby's things?" He unbuttoned his cuffs slowly, not looking at me. "I moved it to the garage. It's in a cardboard box on the top storage shelf behind the winter tires." "What? Why would you touch that? Why would you put my baby's things in the freezing garage?" "Because it's morbid, Kaylin," he snapped, finally looking at me with undisguised irritation. "You're obsessing over a clump of cells that didn't make it. It's deeply unhealthy. You go in there and cry over socks for a child that doesn't exist. I'm removing the temptation for you to wallow. You should be thanking me." He had touched my sacred things. He had taken my deepest, most private sorrow and exiled it to a dirty, oil-stained shelf in the garage. Beat 7 was the ally attack. I was so broken, so thoroughly hollowed out by December, that I finally broke down and confided in his best friend, Mark. Mark had known Declan since college. They played golf every Sunday. I desperately needed someone to tell me I wasn't crazy. I met Mark for coffee at a busy Starbucks downtown. I broke down, crying openly over my latte, telling him how cold Declan had become, how he had taken my car keys, how he humiliated me at the Thanksgiving dinner, how he tracked my phone. Mark stirred his coffee slowly, refusing to meet my eyes, looking deeply uncomfortable. "Look, Kaylin," Mark said softly, leaning in. "Declan is under a massive amount of stress at the firm right now. And honestly, you're suffocating him with your grief. You're a dark cloud. Every time he comes home, you're crying or picking a fight. He's gaslighting me, Mark. He's cruel. He's tired, Kaylin. Men don't know how to deal with constant, heavy emotions like that. You need to snap out of it. Put on some makeup. Be a supportive, happy wife, or you're going to push him away permanently. He's a good guy. Don't ruin your marriage because you can't move on." I sat back in my chair, the noise of the coffee shop rushing back into my ears. I realized then that the system was entirely closed. Declan's enablers would always protect him. They were part of his shield. I was entirely, fundamentally alone. Beat 8 was the institutional threat. It happened 3 days before Christmas. We were arguing in the kitchen because I had been reviewing our joint bank statements and found a strange, glaring charge on our credit card. $450 for a clinic called Midwest Pediatric Cardiology. "Why is there a charge for a pediatric heart specialist on our statement?" I asked, holding the paper up, my hand shaking. "Declan, look at this." He didn't even glance at the paper. He kept chopping an onion. "Identity theft. Someone stole the card numbers. I already called the bank and reported it. Drop it." "Declan, identity thieves buy flat-screen TVs and laptops. They don't steal a credit card to pay for specialized baby doctors." He stopped chopping. He put the knife down. He walked past me into the bedroom, rummaged in his briefcase, came back out, and slammed a thick, glossy brochure onto the granite kitchen counter. It was a pamphlet for a high-security residential psychiatric facility in St. Paul. The cover featured a woman looking serenely out a window. "I visited their admissions office today," he said, his voice terrifyingly calm, devoid of any anger. "If you don't stop this crazy, paranoid, hysterical behavior, I am going to have a doctor evaluate you. I have already spoken to a lawyer. I can have you involuntarily committed, Kaylin. You are losing your mind. You are seeing ghosts. If you don't shut your mouth and fall in line, I will have you locked up in a padded room for your own safety." He wasn't bluffing. I looked into his eyes and saw the cold, dead reptilian calculation. He was actively laying the legal and medical groundwork to have me institutionalized so he wouldn't have to deal with the financial fallout of a divorce. Beat 9 was the cruelest moment. The breaking point. It was mid-January. The absolute, unforgiving dead of winter. The temperature outside was minus 12 degrees, and with the wind chill, it felt like minus 30. Declan came home at 1 a.m. I heard the deadbolt click. When he walked into the living room, he smelled heavily of that sterile hospital soap again, mixed with stale coffee and winter mint. I was sitting on the couch in the dark, wide awake, wrapped in a thick wool sweater. "Where were you?" I asked quietly, not moving. "Site visit. Late negotiations with the zoning board," he slurred slightly, shrugging off his heavy coat. "Show me your phone." He stopped halfway across the living room. The silence in the house was deafening. "Excuse me?" "Show me your phone, Declan. Right now. Unlock it and hand it to me." He let out a sharp, hissing breath. He walked toward me. He didn't look angry. He looked profoundly annoyed, like he was about to swat a persistent, buzzing fly. He reached down, grabbed the thick collar of my wool sweater, and hauled me to my feet with terrifying, effortless strength. He didn't punch me. He didn't slap me. He just used his sheer, overwhelming physical size to march me backward across the hardwood floor. "Declan, stop," I gasped, stumbling backward, my socks slipping on the wood. "What are you doing?" He pushed me hard against the heavy oak front door. The back of my head cracked against the solid wood, sending a flash of white light across my vision. Then he reached behind me, turned the brass deadbolt, ripped the door open, and violently shoved me out onto the icy concrete porch. I was wearing thin yoga pants, a sweater, and thin cotton socks. No coat, no shoes. "Stay out there until you learn how to respect your husband," he spat, his breath pluming in the freezing air. And he slammed the door. The deadbolt clicked loudly into place. I stood there in the pitch-black, freezing darkness. The wind bit through my clothes instantly, feeling like thousands of tiny, freezing needles piercing my skin. The cold radiating up from the icy concrete through my thin cotton socks was agonizing. I knocked on the door. "Declan, let me in. It's freezing." Nothing. I pounded harder. "Please." I peered through the narrow glass side panel next to the door. He had walked into the brightly lit kitchen, opened the refrigerator, and was casually eating a slice of leftover pepperoni pizza straight from the cardboard carton, entirely ignoring the front door. I stayed on that porch for 45 minutes. I huddled into a tight ball against the rough brick wall, shivering so hard I thought my abdominal muscles would tear. My toes went entirely numb within 10 minutes. My fingers turned a terrifying, waxy white. My teeth chattered so violently my jaw ached. And as I sat there, literally freezing to death on my own front porch while my husband ate cold pizza 10 feet away in a heated house, something inside the deepest, darkest part of my brain finally snapped. It was a clean, sharp break. The weeping, terrified victim died on that icy concrete. The strategist woke up. I stopped crying. Not a single tear fell. The shivering slowly subsided, replaced by a cold, burning clarity. I remembered Grandmother Elise's dry, raspy voice echoing over a cup of black tea. "You don't cry when someone hurts you. You wait. You watch. You collect your proof." When he finally opened the door an hour later, smirking down at me, fully expecting me to fall at his feet and beg for his merciful forgiveness, I didn't say a word. I stood up on numb wooden legs. I walked past him in absolute silence. I walked up the stairs, got into bed under the heavy duvet, and stared at the dark ceiling, my heart beating with a new, terrifying rhythm. The very next morning I began the quiet, meticulous demolition of his life. Phase 5. The hidden preparation. The very first thing I did was take a DNA test. I didn't take it to catch him in an affair. I had no idea what he was actually doing. I took it for myself. I ordered a comprehensive medical and ancestry DNA kit online because I was terrified that my miscarriage was caused by an undiagnosed genetic clotting disorder, and I desperately wanted answers about my own body since my mother's medical history was a complete mystery. I swabbed the inside of my cheek with the little plastic wand, sealed it in the sterile tube, mailed it off, and spent the next 2 months playing the role of the perfect, broken, submissive wife. I stopped arguing entirely. I smiled softly when he spoke to me. I made his favorite dinners: steak, roasted potatoes, heavy red wine. I asked him how his day was. I let him think he had won. I let him believe that the night on the freezing porch had finally broken my rebellious spirit and tamed me. What nobody in his life knew was that I had hired one of the most ruthless, bloodthirsty divorce attorneys in Minneapolis. A woman named Sarah who wore immaculately tailored Armani suits, had a corner office with a sweeping view of the city, and looked at arrogant men like they were interesting, slightly annoying bugs she was preparing to squash. I sat at her massive mahogany conference table, smelling her expensive perfume, and gave her everything. I told her about the $450 pediatric cardiologist charge. I told her about the brand new pacifier hidden in the car. I told her about the relentless, clinging smell of hospital soap. Sarah steepled her fingers, her sharp eyes gleaming. "He's hiding a child, Kaylin," she said flatly. "Are you sure? He could just be having an affair." Affairs smell like cheap perfume and hotel soap. Secret children smell like bleach, pacifiers, and pediatric cardiology bills. He has a second life. But we need hard paper proof. We need records. Suspicions don't hold up in court. 3 weeks later, the DNA test results finally hit my email inbox. I sat at my laptop in the kitchen, sipping coffee. There were no genetic clotting disorders. I was perfectly healthy. But there was a bright red notification icon in the Family Matches tab. It said, "Close relative match. Estimated relationship, half-niece/nephew." I clicked on it, my brow furrowing in confusion. The match was a profile managed by a woman named Elena Vargas. The child's DNA was a 25% match to me. But I don't have any siblings. I'm an only child. My father was an only child. The only possible way I could match with a half-niece or nephew was if the child shared DNA with my husband, and the testing algorithm was matching us through the marital DNA pool. No, wait, my brain scrambled. Ancestry databases don't work like that. They don't test by marriage. I stared at the glowing screen, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. If I matched with this child, it meant the child shared my bloodline. It meant the child belonged to my father. My father, who had walked out 24 years ago, had started another family. This child was my half-sister's baby. I dug deeper into the profile. Elena Vargas. I opened a new tab and searched the name on Facebook. I found her immediately. Her profile was public. She was a pediatric ICU nurse at Minneapolis General Hospital. And sitting next to her in her profile picture, smiling widely at a summer barbecue, was my husband's best friend, Mark. No. I leaned closer to the screen, my breath catching. It wasn't Mark. I furiously scrolled through Elena's photo albums. She had a sister, a beautiful, radiant, dark-haired woman named Sophia. And there, in a photo album dated exactly 1 year ago, was Sophia, heavily, undeniably pregnant, wearing a blue maternity dress. Standing right next to her, with his arm wrapped tightly and proudly around her waist, was Declan, my husband. The bright, cheerful caption read, "Baby shower for Sophia and Declan. Can't wait for little Leo to arrive. So glad Declan could sneak away from work to celebrate with us." I looked at the date of the post. November 14th. It was the exact same day I miscarried our baby in the ER. While I was bleeding on the cold linoleum floor, begging him not to leave me, he didn't go to a high-stakes client dinner. He went to his pregnant mistress's baby shower. I didn't scream. I didn't throw my coffee mug against the wall. I didn't cry. My hands were as steady as a surgeon's. I systematically took high-resolution screenshots of every single photo in that album. I saved them to a hidden, encrypted cloud drive. I drove to the public library, paid 40 cents, and printed them out in full glossy color. I took the crisp, warm prints directly to Sarah's office and laid them out on her mahogany table like playing cards. "We file for divorce today," I told her, my voice dead and flat. "No," Sarah smiled, a terrifying, predatory smile that showed all her teeth. "If we file now, he panics. He moves his money to offshore accounts. He hides his assets. We subpoena first. We hit him with discovery before he even knows he's in a fight." We needed a solid legal pretext to subpoena his medical and financial records without alerting him to the infidelity. Sarah found it brilliantly. Declan had recently moved a massive amount of money, nearly $150,000, out of our joint savings account. When I had asked him about it a week prior, he claimed he needed it to cover medical debts he had incurred from a private, embarrassing health issue he hadn't wanted to tell me about. He was actively laying the groundwork to claim severe financial hardship in the impending divorce he thought he was going to control. Sarah aggressively filed a legal subpoena for his complete medical records and financial guarantees to legally verify this mysterious health debt. Because he was a towering, arrogant narcissist who believed he was smarter than everyone else, he didn't fight the subpoena hard enough. He had his lawyers hand over the files. He genuinely thought his tracks were perfectly covered. He thought he had used a fake name at the hospital. He didn't. When the thick stack of subpoenaed records arrived in Sarah's office a month later, we sat at the conference table and opened the heavy manila file. The bomb hidden in those papers was absolutely nuclear. There was no medical debt for Declan. He was perfectly healthy. There was, however, a legally binding, notarized hospital financial guarantor contract, signed in black ink by Declan Vance, claiming full, unconditional financial responsibility for the medical care of one Sophia Vargas. The total debt? Exactly $267,300. Sophia's baby, Leo, had been born dangerously premature. He required a grueling 6-week stay in the neonatal intensive care unit. He required a top-tier pediatric cardiologist to repair a heart murmur. Declan had secretly, desperately taken out a massive second mortgage on his flagship commercial property to pay the $267,300 hospital bill to keep his secret family afloat, entirely bankrupting his own business in the process. And the baby's official birth certificate was tucked right in the back of the file. Date of birth? November 15th, 2:30 a.m. The exact night I miscarried. He had left me bleeding and terrified in the ER on the first floor to run 4 floors up to the maternity ward to hold his mistress's hand and watch her give birth to his son. The sterile hospital soap smell on his skin when he came home. The brand new pacifier dropped in the car. The $450 pediatric cardiologist charge on our credit card. The missing memory box. It all locked into place with a deafening metallic click. I had my proof. The knife was firmly in my hand. Now I just needed my stage. Phase 6, the reversal. I could have just served him the divorce papers at home. I could have left the thick stack of documents on the kitchen counter, packed my bags, and disappeared into the night. But Grandmother Elise didn't raise a woman who slips out the back door in silence. I waited 3 excruciating weeks for Sylvia's 60th birthday dinner. It was held at a private, enclosed dining room in Manny's Steakhouse, the most exclusive, fiercely expensive restaurant in downtown Minneapolis. The room smelled of rich truffles, aged beef, and expensive cigar smoke clinging to wool coats. Sylvia had invited 25 people. Declan's entire extended family, his senior business partners, his best friend Mark and Claire, the woman who had mocked my womb at Thanksgiving. Everyone who had ever looked down on me. Everyone who had ever enabled his monstrous behavior. I wore a stunning floor-length emerald green silk dress that clung to my curves. I spent 2 hours doing my hair and makeup. I looked absolutely, untouchably flawless. I carried a large, heavy black leather tote bag. We sat through the elaborate seafood appetizers. We sat through the endless pouring of expensive red wine. I smiled. I made polite small talk. I ate my oysters. When the main courses were cleared, Declan stood up at the head of the long, candlelit table, tapping his crystal wine glass with a silver spoon. Clink, clink, clink. The room quieted down, all eyes turning to him. "I just want to say, Declan began, flashing his charismatic $1,000,000 smile looking around the room. How incredibly blessed we all are to be here tonight. Family is everything. Loyalty is everything. Mom, you taught me how to be a man of integrity. You taught me that no matter how hard life gets, you protect the people you love. You stand by them. Sylvia beamed from her seat, dabbing at her dry eyes with a linen napkin. Mark clapped him loudly on the back. "Here! Here!" someone shouted. "And to my beautiful, resilient wife, Kaylin." Declan gestured to me with his wine glass, his eyes full of fake, glittering warmth. "It's been a tough year for us. We've had our struggles, but we weathered the storm. We stayed together, because that's what real marriage is. Absolute commitment." Everyone around the table awed. Claire smiled at me, raising her glass. It was deeply, profoundly nauseating. I stood up. I didn't have a glass to clink. I didn't smile. I just reached down into my heavy black leather tote bag. "Declan is right," I said, my voice projecting clearly and calmly across the quiet, dimly lit room. Commitment is a beautiful, rare thing. It takes a massive amount of dedication, time, and energy to manage a marriage. I pulled out a heavy stack of 25 thick manila folders. "It takes even more dedication," I continued, my voice steady as stone, "to manage 2 of them." I handed the first folder to Sylvia, placing it right on top of her dessert plate. I handed the second folder to Mark. I walked slowly down the length of the long table, my silk dress rustling, calmly placing a thick folder in front of every single guest, boss, and family member. "What is this, Kaylin?" Declan asked, his charismatic smile faltering slightly, a flicker of genuine confusion crossing his face. "A joke? Did you print out a menu?" "No joke, Declan," I said, reaching the end of the table and standing by the heavy mahogany doors. "Just some light reading for dessert." Sylvia frowned, adjusting her reading glasses. She opened her folder. Inside was the high-resolution printout of the $267,300 hospital guarantor contract, complete with Declan's unmistakable signature. Below that was the official state birth certificate of Leo Vargas, listing Declan Vance as the biological father. Below that was the glossy color photo of Declan and pregnant Sophia at the baby shower. Below that, and on top of it all, serving as a cover page, was a cleanly printed timeline I had meticulously created in Excel. Side-by-side columns. Left column, 2:14 a.m. Kaylin Vance admitted to ER for active miscarriage. Declan Vance leaves, citing emergency client meeting. Right column, 2:30 a.m. Declan Vance signs admission papers for Sophia Vargas in maternity ward, 4 floors up in the exact same hospital. I stood by the door and watched the exact moment the shockwave hit the room. It was like watching a bomb detonate in slow motion. Sylvia let out a sound that wasn't human. It was a high, thin, rattling wheeze like a deflating tire. She dropped the folder onto her plate, her hands flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with absolute horror. Mark turned chalk pale. He looked from the birth certificate in his hands, up to Declan, and back down to the papers, his jaw unhinging. Declan picked up his own folder from the table. He looked at the birth certificate. He looked at the $267,300 debt contract that proved he had bankrupted his firm. He looked at the baby shower photo. I have never, in my entire life, seen a human being physically collapse from the inside out. It was purely cinematic. The blood drained from his face so fast his skin took on a sickly, grayish-green hue. He looked like a fresh corpse. His jaw went entirely slack. His massive hands began to shake so violently the heavy manila papers rattled audibly against the wood table. Sweat instantly beaded on his forehead. "Kaylin," he whispered, his voice cracking, entirely stripped of its arrogant, booming bass. How did you get this?" "A medical subpoena, Declan," I said smoothly, my voice echoing in the dead silence. "Turns out you're really, really bad at hiding $250,000 in NICU bills. And you're even worse at hiding your location." The room violently erupted. His uncle stood up, knocking his chair over, shouting at Declan. Sylvia was actively hyperventilating, clutching her chest and sobbing hysterically. Mark stood up, pushing his chair back so hard it crashed into the wall. "You son of a bitch!" Mark yelled, pointing a trembling finger at Declan. You told me she was crazy. You sat in my house and told me she was making things up. You left her miscarrying?" Declan looked at me through the chaos. The mask was completely, entirely gone. He didn't look broad-shouldered or confident anymore. He looked incredibly small. He looked utterly terrified. He took a desperate step toward me, reaching out his shaking hand, tears welling in his eyes. "Kaylin, please," he begged, his voice trembling. "Please, we can talk about this. Let me explain. Let's go home." I looked at him. I searched my heart for a shred of pity, a shred of anger, a shred of lingering love. I felt absolutely nothing. No rage, no sadness, just the cool, clean, sterile peace of an empty room. I delivered my final 10 words. "You're her problem now. Don't ever contact me again." I turned on my heel, pushed open the heavy mahogany doors, walked out of the private dining room and stepped out into the freezing, crisp Minneapolis night. The cold air hit my face and it felt like absolute freedom. I didn't look back once. Phase 7, the aftermath. The cascade of his total ruin was spectacular, and it happened with terrifying, unstoppable speed. Within 2 weeks, the divorce was finalized. Because I had definitive, undeniable proof of massive marital asset dissipation, the $267,300 he had secretly spent on his mistress and illegitimate child behind my back, the judge awarded me the house, the primary bank accounts, and my entire wedding planning business untouched. Declan was left with exactly 0 assets, completely saddled with $250,000 in secret medical debt and ordered to pay my legal fees. Within a month, the mistress, Sophia, left him. She wasn't in it for true, enduring love. She genuinely thought she had bagged a wealthy, successful commercial real estate broker who was going to easily leave his barren, crazy wife for her and buy her a mansion in the suburbs. When she realized Declan was completely broke, drowning in NICU debt, entirely cut off from his family's wealth and living in a cheap, moldy rental apartment in St. Paul, she packed up the baby and moved back to Chicago. She immediately hit him with maximum wage-garnishing child support. Within 2 months, his professional reputation entirely disintegrated. Minneapolis is a big city, but the commercial real estate world is a very small, gossipy town. The senior partners at that dinner party talked. The story of what he did in the hospital that night spread through the corporate world like a virulent virus. Nobody wanted to do business with a man who could abandon his miscarrying wife to go to his mistress's baby shower. It was a level of sociopathy that made investors sick. His firm quietly asked for his immediate resignation, citing moral turpitude. The enablers fell too. Sylvia left me 3 long, sobbing voicemails, crying so hard she was choking, begging me to forgive her for how she treated me, telling me she had absolutely no idea her son was such a monster, pleading with me to come over for tea. I deleted them all without listening to the end. Mark sent me a long, groveling 4-page email apologizing profusely for calling me crazy, admitting he had been manipulated, and asking if he could buy me dinner to make it right. I blocked his email address and never replied. Declan's final desperate contact attempt came 6 months later. It was a cold, rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting on my new couch reading a book. My phone rang from an unknown number. I answered it. "Kaylin?" His voice was thin, ragged, and profoundly exhausted. He sounded like a hollowed-out ghost of the man I had met in the bakery. "Yes," I said neutrally. "I lost everything," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Sophia left me. She took Leo. My mom won't even speak to me. The firm fired me. I'm bankrupt. I'm living in a studio apartment above a laundromat in St. Paul. I just wanted to call and say you won. You destroyed me, Kaylin. You completely destroyed my life." I sat on the couch in my quiet, peaceful living room. The afternoon sun was streaming through the large bay window, catching the dancing dust motes in the air. The house smelled faintly of vanilla and old books. I took a slow sip of my hot black tea. "I didn't destroy you, Declan," I said calmly, my voice steady. "I just handed you a mirror. You destroyed yourself." I hung up. I blocked the number. My life now is smaller, quieter, but it is entirely, unequivocally mine. I still live in Minneapolis. I still run my highly successful wedding planning business, though I have instituted a strict new rule. I do not work with couples who speak disrespectfully to each other during cake tastings or vendor meetings. Life is far too short to celebrate toxic love. I bought a small, beautiful, historic house in the tree-lined McAllister Groveland neighborhood. It has a big, fenced-in garden and original, creaky hardwood floors that I love. I adopted a goofy, affectionate golden retriever named Barnaby, who sleeps at the foot of my bed and keeps my feet warm. On Sunday mornings, I wake up early. I walk into my kitchen, boil water on the stove, and make a cup of strong black tea. I sit on my front porch, wrapped in a thick, heavy wool blanket, and I watch the snow fall silently on the quiet street. The air is freezing, but I am safe. I am warm. I am completely free. Grandmother Elise was right. My grandmother always said, "Never let the person holding the knife tell you how deep the cut is." Declan thought he could cut me into pieces, gaslight my reality, and tell me it was just a little scratch. He thought I would bleed out quietly in the dark, too weak and confused to fight back. He didn't realize that while he was busy holding the knife, I was quietly, patiently, meticulously building the guillotine.